Distinguished panelists, distinguished participants of this panel. My name is Teija Tiilikainen. I'm the director for the European Centre of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats, and I'm very happy to chair this panel on hybrid threats in a particular context. Before we go to that context and to that form of threats, I want to introduce the panel. We have the Prime Minister of Latvia, Mrs. Evika Siliņa, with us in the panel. We have the Foreign Minister of Finland, Mrs. Elina Valtonen. We have the Foreign Minister of Sweden, Malmer Stenergard. And we have the Assistant Secretary General from NATO, Mr. Jean-Charles Ellermann-Kingombe. So with this panel, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to discuss hybrid threats or even hybrid warfare in the Baltic Sea region, and not only region, but concretely against the underwater infrastructures in the Baltic Sea. I will just very briefly introduce to the topic. Hybrid threats have become a commonplace tool that is used by mainly authoritarian states, unconventional tools used against democracies to weaken us, our societies, polarize our societies, and of course the final goal is to strengthen the role of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea at the global stage. So to use tools that are cost efficient, that exploit vulnerabilities of democratic societies, to avoid countermeasures. When we are not prepared for these types of threats, there won't be countermeasures, or it will take time to get those measures in place. And this is what the kind of concept and the framework is. In the spring 2024, the major intelligence services came clearly out with the message that there are a higher likelihood for hybrid threat attacks against critical infrastructures in the north of Europe, Baltic Sea region. And it didn't take long once we started to see attacks against gas pipelines, data cables, undersea critical infrastructures in general. There is not always evidence or attribution about who it was, but of course there are strong doubts. We see these tools in use in other contexts, and the likelihood of malign activity in this context is also very clear. So this is our topic, and with the panelists I'm going to discuss this, how we can prevent them, can we prevent them, and who should have the instruments to prevent these activities. Is there a way for us to enhance our resilience against attacks against the critical veins of our society, infrastructures? But I start with a general question to Prime Minister Siliņa. The Baltic Sea has become a theater now for these hybrid threat activities against critical infrastructures, also other forms of hybrid threats. Why the Baltic Sea? Why that particular region is now the kind of the theater for intensified activities? How should we explain this context?
Okay, thank you for your question. And to be here with such a strong panelist, I would say we are halfway forward of defending ourselves, because we have been working a lot together, those countries which are presented here. Why Baltic states? And why Baltic Sea? We have been experiencing Russia's hybrid attacks since we got independent in 1919. And Baltic Sea, cybersecurity attacks, hybrid war, it's not just happened to start when war in Ukraine started. We have experienced it already in 1940 when our elections were forged. And we can see the same patterns happening in Ukraine, what they want to do. So we have to be aware of all the possible ways how hybrid threats can happen and what are the similarities. So because since Crimea happened, those hybrid threats has been more widespread, frequent, and kinetic. So on the Baltic Sea is probably the place where Russian shadow fleet is going through many of our coastlines, because more than 2,000 ships are now frequently going through Baltic Sea. Not all of them are shadow fleet ships, but I know that some of them are carrying illegal goods, trying to reach other countries and St. Petersburg and the ports in which connects Russia. So therefore, Baltic Sea is important for us, and we need to find a way how we can protect them. So I believe that those countries which lives near Baltic Sea, and since Finland and Sweden has become members of NATO as well, we have been working together very closely, and we can see all the strange issues happening within the vessels, and that there is so bad seamanship that they causes damage to our cables. And there is a lot of cables in Baltic Sea, and very strategic ones, to all of our countries. What we have done, like for example in Latvia, we stopped buying Russian gas. So we need Baltic Sea to be open to deliver the gas by the sea. We stopped last week all the process regarding electricity grid. So all the electricity which was stabilized through Russia and Belarus is not happening anymore. So Baltic countries are free from that. And again, we need to secure our electricity cables in Baltic Sea. So Baltic Sea is very strategic for all the countries, not just Baltic states, but all the countries which live near the Baltic Sea. And Baltic Sea is used by Russia as well. So that's why I mean Baltic Sea is a strategic place for Russia.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask the same question, or pose the same question to Mr. Ellermann-Kingombe. When you look at this situation from NATO's point of view, NATO has also started some new activities to deter these activities in the Baltic Sea. But what kind of an interpretation would you provide? So why Baltic Sea? Is this because of the vulnerabilities of the Baltic Sea states, or their dependency on these infrastructures? Or is there maybe another type of strategic goal for whoever does this?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important that we talk about the intent of hybrid activity. I think this is a pattern we're seeing not only in the Baltic Sea but in other parts of our territory. Is a tendency we've seen in recent years: increased activity, increased recklessness also on the part of our adversaries, and yes, there is the intent of generally destabilization of our societies. I think it's very important to also recall that for the Russians, hybrid warfare is an integrated part of their military doctrine. I mean, this is a way of paving the way for, or giving themselves options for subsequent steps. So destabilization is one important element. Another important element is also to discourage us from supporting the Ukrainians. And I think what characterizes the countries around the Baltic Sea, they are some of the strongest proponents and most active supporters of Ukraine. So I think there is all the intent that you can find around that Baltic Sea if you are a Russian adversary.
I will soon still get a little bit back to these final goals. There is also the assumption that this might be just Russia testing or an actor testing its tools for later possible high-intensity conflicts. So we might really need to think about all these possible goals that are in the mind of the actor. I would like to get now to our two foreign ministers, Minister Valtonen. The discussion of today in our countries is, are we resilient enough? Are our critical infrastructures undersea or in general resilient enough to counter or to protect us from these kinds of hybrid threats? And can such a comprehensive resilience exist? In principle, we cannot monitor all the pipelines and data cables. How do you see the situation in particular with the background of the discussion about legal vulnerabilities? The adversaries seem to be strategic and do their activities in those zones of the sea where the coastal states have less powers. So is resilience, is it possible to achieve complete resilience or perfect resilience?
Well, perfect resilience is not possible to achieve. And one of the main reasons is, which I don't think it's a fault at all, it's a feature, it is that we are open societies, which means that we, of course, don't run around, as people, being monitored constantly by something, so that we rely on the goodwill of people to a very strong degree and the individual responsibility of people. And again, I think this is a good thing, right? But of course, there is more critical infrastructure than less, or there are differences between infrastructure which we have to be protecting. And of course, a key element of an open society is as well that we take care of our security. So starting, of course, with military deterrence and being able to defend ourselves, but also very much also against civilian attacks. What comes to the Baltic Sea discussion, though, I think it's extremely important to note that even though we know that Russia certainly is willing and able to carry out a certain number of, heinous attacks against us, we always have to be working on fact, because we are countries who rely on the rule of law, and if we are in the stage of investigating something, then we are at the stage of investigating something. We don't, especially as a politician, obviously, I don't interfere with that process. I'm not, putting around guesstimates of what might be behind a certain attack, because in many cases, of course, the first thing to question is whether the attack is deliberate or no, or if something happens. And then the next question is, if it's deliberate, yes, well, is there a state actor behind it or no? And you start having this matrix of options, and only, I must say, still in the rare cases, you would have, intentional activity of a state actor. So we have to also keep our heads calm and not attribute everything to Russia, where they don't even necessarily have their fingers at play. And a final note, sorry for keeping this so long, what we know is harmful is Russian shadow fleet for 3 reasons. First of all, they are using it to undermine the sanctions. Second thing, massive threat and risk to the environment. I think Sweden was one of the first countries to really voice this out right at the beginning, because obviously the shadow fleet hasn't been there for too long, for 2 years. And now, of course, we also see the increase in the incidents in the sea, which is linked. And third thing, of course, they are a threat to our critical infrastructure. So again, whether intentional or no, we have to find ways to restrict the use of the shadow fleet.
Thank you, Minister Malmer Stenergard. A Swedish strength or a focal area for Sweden is psychological resilience. You had an institute earlier on that. It has been re-established, and at least from the Finnish point of view, we follow your work on that. How do you think this kind of activity affects the psychological resilience of a people, or in our region in general, when there are constantly there is constantly damage done by someone to our critical infrastructures. As Minister Valtonen said, sometimes the processes are difficult the investigation processes are long and getting difficult, and there won't be any evidence on who did it or any attribution. So is this a problem from that point of view? Kind of people losing trust in the governance or the political leadership when they see their security weakened and still the leadership cannot really take or can hardly take any measures?
Well, that is of course a good question, but that is also the goal of Russia, of course, to make us weak, make us hesitate if it's worth it to actually support Ukraine, which it definitely is. And in Sweden there is a huge support for supporting Ukraine. But of course Russia is trying to influence us, and they do it by using several means. And so we've come to the conclusion that we have to build up resilience in society, and of course one is making sure that the population is enlightened, that they are very much aware of what is going on. And this is closely linked to what Elina said, that we also shouldn't, like you say in Swedish at least, shout wolf every time. We have to stay calm and make sure that we know more about what is actually going on. So the topic of this panel is hybrid. And I really don't like the word because it sounds like an environmentally friendly Volkswagen. But what it's actually about, when we talk about it, it's hostile activities aimed at changing our behavior, in this case, the support for Ukraine. So fighting the hybrid activities is a very big part of the deterrence of Russia. And we should also keep in mind what Elina said, that it could also be very different things. So it's the hybrid activities that could be a lot of different things. And then we have the shadow fleet, which is a result of the oil price cap, more or less, and which is causing a lot of harm and potential harm. And then we have the increased number of underwater incidents. And I believe that there are many reasons behind that, but some of them are linked to the shadow fleet with bad seamanship. But we have to make sure that we get the facts on the table. But one thing that we know, finally, is that we have to be very fast in our reactions. So I think that the Finnish example in December and the Swedish example in January, when we work closely together, we share information fast and we act swiftly. That is key to fighting this.
Prime Minister, yes.
Yeah. May I add to that? Yes, I also wanted to add that hybrid threat doesn't sound really like a real threat. What we actually understand by hybrid threat is that there is a state-organized threat. So it's state behind any threat. For example, instrumentalization of migrants on our borders, on borders of Finland. We know it was organized by Russia. On our borders, it was organized by Belarus. And so what it means, we have to pull a lot of our efforts, financing, personnel, towards this border. It means we lose a lot of our resources towards one point. Then we had an accident on a very important museum of occupation in Latvia. It's symbolic. It seems so innocent. Someone just threw arson in a window of the museum and started to fire. And it looked like some criminals, just drunk people did it. But what we could gather the information, and we really share information in between our friends, Baltic friends and NATO countries, and we could gather that behind that it was Russia's organized GRU activities. Just they hire someone who is like former criminal, and it doesn't look so open face like this is done by Russia. But look at Ukraine, what Russia is doing. They are bombing their important energy sources. They're bombing their water resources. We could call them as well hybrid attacks. But that's actually how they destroy the resources and normal life in any country. And probably their wishes to get into our people's minds, to start feel shaken into societies, that we will not be able to make bold decisions regarding helping Ukraine, as well helping ourselves, building our resilience and deterrence in different levels.
Thank you so much. Before I give the floor to the audience for your questions and comments to the panelists, I want to raise one further topic here in this context. Ms. Valtonen said that it's not possible to kind of establish a perfect resilience. We are not such a society that would simply monitor everything all the time. But the debate of today is also that could we establish proactive measures, so could we deter? And this is also the discussion NATO is having. So how could we prevent, how could we impose a cost on these malign activities to prevent them from happening? Are we just kind of supposed to take everything that comes and try to be resilient? What do you think, Mr. Ellermann-Kingombe? Is there a way for NATO or the nations or the members, allies of NATO, to deter hybrid threats?
I mean, first of all, I think it's very important that the starting point for the work we're doing on the new hybrid strategy is a recognition that in spite of all the good things we've done in terms of resilience, we have not been able to prevent the increase in hybrid activities. So I think there is a discussion about how do we deter, how do we impose costs, how do we choose a more robust or proactive toolbox. I think the Minister raised a very key question here, and that is the issue of attribution. So we at NATO, we are not questioning that attribution belongs to the allies. And attribution is something that is something that we need to do properly, usually the result of an investigation, etc., and something that will take time. I think the interesting lesson that we take from the Baltic Sea and how we responded, how you've responded, how NATO responded, is that we're actually able to do quite a lot of things without having an attribution. So what we see here, we see a pattern. We see a potential risk to your critical infrastructure. We know the intentions of the Russians, and on the basis of these elements, we're actually able to do something that in reality imposes a cost on the Russians, because the Russians do not like to see an increased NATO presence in the Baltic Sea. So I think in NATO, our thinking around this is that this is an asymmetric response to hybrid warfare, even in a situation where there is not a specific incident that can be directly attributed to Russia. And I think this idea of being able to act upon patterns, providing asymmetric responses, drawing not only on the economic toolbox but also on the military toolbox, I think these are some of the ideas that we will be exploring when we negotiate a new strategy with the allies.
A follow-up question to this. Do you think that because in order to deter and impose a cost, we should be pretty well aware of the cost calculus of the malign actor? So what exactly is that malign actor trying to achieve? Do you think that kind of mental map of the malign actors is clear for us? Do we know what is a cost? And this is maybe also a question to our ministers here. These are tricky questions, but sometimes there is the argument that we tend to believe that the malign actors function as we would in their case. And if we think about the Russian aggression or the attack against Ukraine, which came as a surprise to many of us in the West, because we simply believed that threshold would not be, that step would not be taken to go into war, but that was not in their cost calculus. So do we know the adversaries well enough to be able to formulate an effective policy of deterrence? Who would like to say a word on that? Minister Valtonen?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good question, but I would think it's safe to assume that if in cases there's a state actor behind, there's some sort of rationale behind it, because typically these actors are rational. even though they act differently from what we would like them to do and what we are used to. And I guess in some cases the rationale is simply to cause, like Prime Minister said, just, cause destabilization or, confusion. And here we are, organizing this panel in beautiful Munich and this, thinking whether there's Russia behind some, action or no, or China even. I mean, that's of course another question, or whichever. So that certainly is one of the goals that they want to achieve. But I guess in many cases, the more information we can gather on that part, it's important. But how I organize my work is that I try to concentrate on issues which I can concentrate, or which I have an influence on. And that certainly means that, especially if we look at really critical stuff, then we should also, prevent those accidents from happening. And there, of course, deterrence, I think it's a strong word, because deterrence somehow, I think it implies partly that there's intention behind. But also those accidents, especially severe accidents like environmental accidents with the shadow fleet, have to be prevented just like that. But it's certainly not in Russian interest to cause an environmental accident, I would assume, because they share the same waters, and plus they would, spill the oil, which is which is massively costly to them, and then also pay for the damage. But I think this. We have come a very long way in NATO to really work on our toolkit. And it's exactly as you say, of course our response needs to be asymmetric, because we are not, we are not hostile actors, of course not. We are protecting ourselves, and we're building everything on the rule of law. And even though it takes a little bit longer, and now we have our legal teams also finding ways to further, make the life of the Shadow Fleet more difficult. Even though it takes time, we just have to live with it.
Thank you. Yes, please.
We see that the number of hybrid activities is increasing, and we also see they are taking more risks and becoming more bold. And I think that this is interlinked to the fact that the war is not going as well as they claim. They have tried to create this Potemkin village that that the war is going well and that the economy is going very well, and it's not. So, and this has also resulted in the increase of the shadow fleet, which causes harm to us, or potential harm, but also to them. So I draw the conclusion that, yes, they are willing to take more risks because they are in a state of war where they don't have any choice. But it's dangerous to both of us.
Thank you. At this stage, I would like to get a couple of questions from the audience. Please introduce yourself and tell us if your question is addressed to one of our panelists. Please. You will get the mic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Sławomir Sierakowski. I'm Polish. I write for Project Syndicate and I run Impact Conference. My question is simple, and I will address it to Prime Minister and also to Minister of Foreign Affairs of Finland, because Poland and the Baltic states are basing its defense strategy mostly, to simplify, on fortifications, right? To stop Russians before they enter. And the Finnish strategy is pretty much on, if I understood, or not oversimplifying, of dragging in Russians. This is how I understood, to let them. You can finish my sentence. So. How compatible is it, or how you wanna merge these two strategies, or just correct me? Thank you very much.
Let's start with that question, Prime Minister, the Latvian strategy and then the Finnish one, please.
Yes, I probably will not be able to comment the Finnish strategy, but we are doing both. We are fortifying our borders, yes. But there is another way, and this is constant, of keeping our people more resilient as well. We are educating our civil society what they should do if something happens, how they should act, how they should read news, where will be the places if something happen, like from military kind of response. But we understand that those hybrid attacks now are on the sea, Baltic Sea, on the ground, and as well in air, because of drones flying through our borders. So we are not just fortifying our foreign border, which is Schengen border, NATO border, Latvian border. This is only one part, because this is the first line. But by showing that as well to our people, to our society, that we are protecting them and we are keeping our deterrence in more different level, we as well are increasing our expenditures on defense. So it's all together. There is no way. So that's why I probably will not agree with the question you actually asked. Because you asked it from one perspective, but there is so many parts like in the puzzle for us to keep our resilience in a more higher level. Because there is no other way how we can act. Just by strengthening our border is not enough.
Thank you so much. Minister Valtonen, what is the Finnish strategy?
Well, on the question of military strategy, there's no Finnish strategy or Latvian strategy in the sense there's NATO strategy, right? And we operate based on NATO's defense plans, and that's it. And of course now as fresh members in NATO, Sweden and Finland, we have been integrating as quickly as possible, and I think it's gone pretty well so far. And happy to contribute to the overall security of the entire alliance, of course.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your answers. Would there be another question from the... Yes, please.
Yes, thank you very much. Alexander Lambsdorff, German ambassador to the Russian Federation. I'd like to inject a bit of a sense of urgency into the debate because seen from Moscow, the two of you are sort of impersonating one of the worst defeats of Russian foreign policy over the last 300 years. You two joining NATO has absolutely changed Russia's perspective on the Baltic. They're extremely nervous about the Gulf of Finland. They're extremely nervous about the Danish Straits. They view this entire area, up and including to northern Germany, and certainly including the Polish coast, as an area of a future conflict. And what we call hybrid, we can also call first stage of a conflict. And so I think it's good that our legal experts should be sitting together, but I really believe we have to be absolutely clear that this region is of major strategic importance to the Russians, who export about 50% of their oil from Ust-Luga through the Baltic Sea. They need the money. And if they can't export their oil any longer, they don't have the money, they cannot wage the war against Ukraine. So it's a strategic situation for Russia that is absolutely essential to the entire outlook of the Russian war machine against Ukraine. Now, that's sort of the sense of urgency on one level. And on another level, we are all neighbors to the Baltic Sea. And Russia already has one oil disaster in the Sea of Azov, Kerch. And they have computer simulations about what would it mean if something like this happened in the Baltic Sea, say south of Sweden, north of Germany. And the costs are just incredible. So my question to you would be, ministers and Prime Minister, is there any way, shape or form that we can make sure that the ships that cross the Baltic Sea and actually do the exportation of the oil are seaworthy? We have a Russian ship impounded in northern Germany that is clearly not seaworthy. The jury is still out on that, but it looks as if it looks pretty bad. So non-seaworthy ships with hundreds, or tens of thousands of tons of oil driving past Jurmala, driving past Sopot, driving past Rügen is not a pleasant idea. If any of them breaks apart, the region will be poisoned for years and years to come.
Thank you so much. Let's take another question here, and then I ask the panelists to kind of formulate their final responses to this discussion. Please.
Thank you very much. Tan Desi, Member of Parliament in the UK and Chair of the House of Commons Defence Committee. And it was wonderful for our Defence Committee to actually visit, including the Minister in Finland, as well as our colleagues in Estonia, because our House of Commons Defence Committee is actually in the middle of an inquiry into defence in the grey zone. And some of the work being undertaken in the Baltics, it is held in very high regard as to how you're countering those hybrid threats. But in terms of a question, would you not think that we need to step up our procedures and protocols to ensure that we protect our critical undersea infrastructure? Because if there is one way that our adversaries are going to be able to destroy our systems and our way of life, it is by cutting more and more of those cables, whether that's in the Baltic and further beyond. So we need to be doing more, as well as also in space. There is a great deal in terms of hybrid threats, not just that we see in terms of physical infrastructure, but also what is happening in space. Thank you.
Thank you so much. With these broad questions, maybe we start with Mr. Ellermann-Kingombe, and then the Prime Minister will get the last word. But I repeat the questions. I, in particular, would like you to address, all of you, also the question of whether the sense of urgency exists in the Baltic Sea states, whether the states of that region, of our region, see the importance of that region as it was formulated by the ambassador, and then about the shadow fleet, and finally the kind of the protocols and procedures to be established to protect critical infrastructures when the operations are intensifying.
I think those three nations and the other nations around the Baltic Sea have shown very clear sense of urgency, very clear determination. They have acted robustly, and it's certainly been followed from Moscow. Moscow watches everything we're doing. They're also watching when we're not doing something. And I think we're very often speculating about how would they react, how would they respond. But they're also looking at us, and when we are not responding, in a situation where we can see, internet or not, that our critical infrastructure is being threatened, they will take that down. So I think I have seen here a sense of urgency, and I think it holds a lot of. There's a lot of lessons to be drawn from this in how we organize our thinking around hybrid. Then on the protection of the critical infrastructure. Well, first of all, I think the fact that we have a greater NATO presence is also a matter of reducing the window where those that have malintent can actually do what they set out to do. And what we've done on top of this increased activity, we have deployed, or we are in the process of deploying a drone fleet, introduce new tech solutions to strengthen our situational awareness, with the purpose of allowing MARCOM, our maritime command in Northwood in England, that it has established an undersea infrastructure cell in May of last year, to have the tools which would allow it to act before something happens, on the basis of seeing deviations from patterns in sail routes, etc. So collect a lot of data, fuse it, send it to MARCOM. So I think there's a lot of thinking going into how do we also through surveillance strengthen our ability to protect our undersea infrastructure. And final point, we have to do this in close collaboration with the private sector that sits on enormous amounts of data, have tools themselves to monitor infrastructure that in many cases they own.
Thank you. Minister Malmer.
Yes, thank you. Well, to begin with, Russian economy is depending on the oil export, and that's where we have to make it very difficult for them. But that is also, like I said before, the reason we have this very difficult situation with the shadow fleet. So we have to do what the Brits are really good at, and that is sanctioning the shadow fleet. But we also have to be more vigilant, which we are trying to be, and I definitely believe that there is a sense of urgency in this regard. We have to make outreach to flag states to remind them of their great responsibility for these vessels. And we also have to look into legislation regarding insurance. I believe we're trying to do that. It's not easy, but at the same time, we have to do all this in accordance with international law and law of the seas, because there are great powers who are only waiting for us to cross the line of the legislation so that they can have a reason to do the same. And that is not in the interest of trading nations, where a lot of our wealth is based upon trade, and where 80% of international trade is seaborne. So we have to do this very wisely.
Thank you so much. Minister Valtonen.
I will keep this short because I agree with both of them massively. Two things. First of all, there's very much a sense of urgency, and I think it's only increased in the past 2 years. Of course, also linked and as a function of the increased frequency of incidents. Second thing, I think this international law, international maritime law in this context is massively important. And of course, since we, in the free world, we operate based on the international law, we always have to base it on it. And also, of course, for us, just like Maria said, it's so important that we have free transport as well, or free passage in the seas. So that is something we should cherish as well. But as said earlier, now we have our legal team sitting down and trying to find further ways of making the life more difficult for the shadow fleet. And I think we've come already quite a long way now that we have introduced the voluntary insurance basically mechanism. Actually led by the UK as well. The Nordic countries, Baltic countries, Germany, Poland, I think the UK and Netherlands is involved. And we've introduced this just a few weeks ago, so let's see how that works. And the technical monitoring also, which is so important of the infrastructure we are now also rolling out. Many things happening. And I hope it leads to more security, but of course also the freedom of navigation, which is so important to all of us. At this stage, I'm sorry, I have to go, but I thank you so much for this panel.
Thank you so much for your participation, Foreign Minister, but still Prime Minister has the final word here.
Yes, I as well agree with everything what's said before, and I believe the urgency is there. So that's what, when I started, I believe those countries which are here really understand the importance and urgency, how we need to act. But sure, there is as well one issue of political will to act. And we can speak a lot about international law and what law allows and not allows us to do. But adding to all what my previous companions of discussion said before, this is very important. And I could assure you that we have really coordinated our actions, how those coastline countries near Baltic Sea will act. We are sharing our information, and we are ready to act. And this is not just I'm saying, we actually are doing. Because last incident in Baltic Sea, where was a cable between Latvia and Sweden involved, we coordinated in Prime Minister's level. We could do it very quickly. So, and thanks to Swedish authorities, they stopped the ship. We investigated it. We know the cause. We know the flag under which ship was flying. We know all the facts, and private companies are helping to investigate it and reconstruct the cable. So we are learning as well from previous actions. But if there is a place within the leaders of those countries to act, it is happening. We had some disputes before, yes, but we found a way. And I really share my gratitude that we could be openly sharing what bothers each of our countries, what are the obstacles we cannot go over. So sure, we have our own parliaments and democratic procedures and legislation, but Above all of that, we all know the price of not acting in the right time.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister. So to conclude, it seems sometimes that hybrid threats are all over the place. The instruments and the tactic is changing, and kind of we have to invest a lot to protect our societies. But as this panel shows, there is also quite more and more of thinking and planning to be done in the governments and also in the European Union and NATO. So we are getting more resilient. With this, I would like to thank the panelists and thank the audience for this session, which is now concluded. Please join me in thanking the